the other one validate on start. It's a really minor thing, so I think the agreement ended up being validate on start, and the other one is the namespace where it goes. Then I looked. The proposal was under, because we have 3 different Microsoft extensions options, libraries. One is options.data annotations, options.configuration extensions, and the other one is just options. So I figured it can go to, because it's not data annotation specific, then the namespace would be the general one, which is Microsoft extensions options. And the static class name would be options builder validation extensions. It's basically just the only thing I wanted to discuss was just these minor, the namespace, the class name, and the where it goes.
Yeah, so let me just scroll down because honestly I forgot what we did last week. I have to scroll back up here, I guess.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so basically when I did it, I think I just assumed you had a typo in the class name, and so I just used the existing class name where the validate data annotations one is on. And I think your proposal is to put it on some other type name, right?
So there was a good feedback last session because in the beginning I had 2 APIs. One was validate annotations eagerly, the other one was just validate eagerly, and then the ask was why do we need both? Right? So because originally I thought we wanted to have both, I placed both of them under data annotations library. So since we don't want to do anything specific for data annotations, the API can move up into outside of that library, outside of options data annotations. It can just go to Microsoft Extensions options.
So is that the name of the DLL, or is that the name of the namespace?
Both. The name of the DLL changes, goes out of Microsoft Extensions options data annotations to Microsoft option. I'm going to write it down.
Yeah, I was about to say because there's so many words that all seem to be different permutations of the same thing.
Does the class you're wanting to add these to already exist?
No.
Can it be named something that's a functional name and not just something with the word extensions on the end?
On the namespace, on the class itself, the class name.
If there is any name that could be better than just a word followed by or something followed by extensions, that is preferable.
Sure.
If there isn't, like if there's not a feature that it's describing, then maybe options builder validation extensions is the best name. But
my original recommendation on this, which is showing on the screen, is options builder validation extensions. But I just went with like how other namings are usually done there. I'm not opposed to any other name. So you're recommending to drop extensions at the end, so like options builder validation, like either helper or extensions. Like usually they're called extensions in there.
I mean, yeah, like we do have a lot of types that use the extension suffix, but if once it has the word extensions on it, we can't really use it for anything other than extensions. If it's named as for some positive functionality, then it could end up with non-extension routines that are on that same type and still make sense. So if this is everything to do with option builder validation, then it doesn't need the word extension. Like people using extension syntax don't see the type name, and putting the word extensions on it blocks us from certain future changes. So while it is the easiest name for people to use, it's the name of last resort.
Yeah, I mean, a good example is enumerable, right? Enumerable has a lot of extension methods over are enumerable, but there's also a bunch of static methods that you have to invoke, like, enumerable.empty, for example. And so having to say enumerable extensions.empty is very, very weird, right? So that's why we generally prefer some sensible class name.
I see. Sure.
What do the similar extension methods for options builder look like today? Are they all suffixed with extensions?
Options builder, there's a bunch of validate options for options builder, but they're not under the static class itself. They're under the options builder class itself. And then there is one extension under data annotations, and the one that you can see on the description of the issue as well, the existing one, which is under options builder data annotations extensions. Let me see, anything else?
I think ASP uses a whole lot of these extension methods off of options builder, not just for data annotations, but for various things. I'm curious what the class names look like for that, just so that we're consistent.
If we were to stay consistent, I think like a lot of extension methods end with the name extension.
So, for example, we have like options builder data annotations extensions, options builder configuration extensions, like current convention.
Yeah. Even in configuration or like elsewhere. Let's see, for example, Microsoft Extensions configuration has static class change builder extensions. Like a lot of these end with the word extensions.
Yeah, ASP definitely did not get the memo about not ending extension method classes with extensions. But I'll take note.
Yeah, but again, if the only thing that's in a type right now are extension methods, that means no one sees it. So having a consistent name actually has no relevance on life.
Yeah, it's not a huge deal, given what it's called.
By not using the word extensions, you could put things like enumerable.empty. And so it's just if there's a name that is not just something where the general thing is we have a type and then type extensions, and then that is just because often it's because we had an assembly boundary or something and we're trying to pretend they're the same type. But we've definitely run into trouble with things like the file system ACLs of we named something extensions and it's like, well, great, now there's a utility method that we really want to put on that same type, but we can't because it's named extensions.
Yeah, I mean, I think other than assembly factoring, the main reason we use extensions in those situations today is because, for example, it needs to be a method operating over a particular generic instantiation, like, memory extension dot trim of read-only span of char or something.
Yeah. Okay, so if there's not currently an options builder validation type, then we're definitely not extending it, which means that options builder validation was the functional name of this, and extensions is just making the type name longer and preventing future enhancement. So we should just drop the word extensions.
So you're proposing the type name options builder validation?
Not knowing anything about what else it does, yes.
I pasted it on the chat. But
yeah, let me find the window now. All right, cool. So then, okay, let me copy and paste this. And you're also proposing to only have one method, right? Is that right?
Yes.
So many windows here. Okay, so the namespace I wrote down last time was dependency injection because that's where the other type lived,
yes,
right?
Yes, the other one was, exactly. The other one in data annotations was under dependency injection, but I looked into Microsoft Extensions options. There's a bunch of, options builder itself is under options, a namespace, and it has a bunch of validate options, so I figured I could place validate on start where other validate APIs are in Microsoft Extensions options.
Right.
And I don't know why the data annotations one is under dependency injection. Maybe that was not the right namespace.
Makes sense.
If I had to guess, it's because we already have a using for the dependency injection in our startup templates. But yeah.
Well, in fairness, you have using to probably 20 namespaces in your template, so.
I mean, we try to keep it, reasonable, but yeah, there are a few. I'm not sure if we have options.
So then my only other question is, I think the constraints last time were just where T options : class, and now it's where T options : class and new. That's intentional, I suppose, right?
What is that again?
So the methods you proposed last time, which were validate early and validate annotations eagerly, right? They had the constraints on the generic were just where T options class. And the validate on start that you now have basically says where T options : class, new. Just make sure that that's intentional.
Okay, let me check. The new, I think the new, did I miss the new last time? Okay. Maybe
might be, yeah. So, it kind of makes sense that it does have to new that up, but.
Yeah, I think I would keep the new.
I mean, or let me do it this way. I think new to me would only make sense if the other, like if the regular validate ones also have it. It would be weird if the validate on start would be the only one that has a new constraint. Because that might mean that you can't easily replace validate to validate on start because now the thing doesn't have a default constructor or something. But I assume that that's the case.
I'm not sure, but the way I don't have much reasoning behind it, but I think I would keep the new unless there is a reason against it.
So the one that exists is this one here. Yeah, so the validate data annotations one that already exists does not have a new constraint. It only has the constraint for class. The only reason why I bring this up is that so we very often have this problem that the existing generic constraints that we have are not as specific as we would like them to be. So we, for example, we have sometimes things only make sense where the supplied argument is an enum, for example. But then the problem is if you already use this API in generic code and you don't have the constraints on your own generics, then even though your code might work because it only happens to be used with generics, it wouldn't compile anymore because the generic that you happen to have is not constrained by the same constraints, right? So if you now say, if you expect people to be able to replace validate data annotations with validate on start, for example, then you might have trouble when, they're in a generic context and their generic is not constrained with the new constraint, right? And there's no really any way for them to cast this away, right? They just can't make it compile anymore. And that's why, generally speaking, if you want to have an overload or logical overload to an existing method, I would just copy the existing constraints and not adding any new ones. Even though they might logically be correct, right?
Sure. I'll also ask David to see.
Yeah, that's smart. Did we decide on the namespace? Are we sticking with the dependency injection?
No, she proposed microservice extensions options, and so everything that the method takes an options builder and gives you back an options builder. Both of them live in extensions options, so it makes the most sense if they are.
push back strongly on that because add options, like service collection.add options, service collection.configure, like any way you actually have to get an options builder, that's normal other than like newing up one with the constructor, which no one actually does, is in Microsoft Extensions dependency injection. So it'd be kind of weird to require a new using, unless, yeah. I mean, if you call .add options and get an options builder, you don't need that using. And the other extension methods are in the dependency injection namespace.
When you use add options, and then if you do add, then you do validate a call on it, the validate call already needs the options namespace.
Which validate call?
It's on options builder itself.
I see. Okay. That makes a difference.
So that means you retract your pushback?
I mean, I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
The question is, how commonly is this API going to be called compared to the validate method on the options builder? Is this going to be something that's called by, you know, a lot? Like, you know, I feel that if it's a very common thing that we want people to do with the options builder, we should put in the dependency injection namespace, because if you're in the startup.cs file in like one of your ASP.NET templates, it'll just show up on the list if it's in dependency injection, versus like having if you start typing the right thing, then it might suggest you add the using for the extension method.
I mean, that argument.
Like, I'm just thinking about the developer experience. Yeah.
I mean, that certainly isn't a consideration, right? I mean, like, there's arguably a correct namespace, but like, if we involve an existing feature, like keeping in mind what usings people tend to have, makes sense to me. Like, if all the existing extension methods are basically in the dependency injection namespace and nobody has a using for the options one, then it does seem odd to basically put the new stuff in the options namespace, because unless they toggle the IntelliSense to show extension methods from unrelated namespaces, they will never see it, right? Which might be very unfortunate.
At which
right.
point
And
I would
ultimately,
retract my objection to the extension suffix and say if we're dropping a class in a completely inappropriate namespace just so that it shows up with the right usings, then putting extensions there is good, because we should not put utility methods on it.
yeah, completely agree with that part.
Okay, so that means we're coming back to Microsoft extensions.dependency injection, and then we leave the type name options builder validation extension.
And we're dropping the new constraint itself, right?
So what was the last part?
And
removing the generic constraint of new.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're not undoing all the things we've talked about, just many of them.
All right, so let me go back to the window now. Does this look right to people now?
I guess the only thing that I'll ask about the class before we put this thing to bed is there an existing class that is close enough to the right name that we don't have to create a new one?
No.
Okay.
Holy shit, everything in that namespace has extensions as a suffix. Are we sure there's not a single one? Because, I mean, there's a lot of them to choose from.
There's no helper class for options builder other than that one in data. We didn't put it to be in data annotation because it's not specific for data annotation.
I mean, there's options builder configuration extensions, there's options builder data annotations extension, options configuration service collection extensions, options service collection extensions. I mean, I don't know. I mean, but it just seems like there's a lot of something extensions.
But yeah, okay.
Like, it probably doesn't matter, quite frankly, in this namespace, because it seems it's already a dumping ground with XXX extensions. So I guess adding one more type will also not, make the namespace any worse. But
yeah, that's why I gave up so easily.
Like, yeah, I honestly
I
don't
told
care.
you we didn't get the memo. We definitely did not get that memo.
Yeah, I have nothing nice to say, so I'll just say nothing. Yeah, then I don't know. Like, I mean, Jeremy, do you care whether we use an existing one or whether we just add a new one to that beautiful dumping ground?
If I am willing to accept Miriam's assertion that there is not an appropriate type to add this to, it's
the data annotation extensions was not in. It's under options.data annotations library, and I didn't want to place it there. And also the same for configuration extensions. This is not specific for configuration extensions. It's specific for configuration extensions. I didn't find another placeholder that already exists. Let me do another quick search, but I didn't find any.
Yeah, that's. I mean,
Yeah,
it seems good enough to me. I mean, quite frankly, like, I mean, they all seem to be incredibly specialized in nature, but they're all very, very narrow types. So that seems to be the pattern of the namespace. So I'm okay with saying, like, yeah, there's nothing really that is specific to validation. So to me, I mean, I don't know. Like, API design is this art of, like, you want to preserve the invariant of the thing you're adding to, and that namespace is, for better or worse, the shape that it has. And so I would preserve that narrow nature, because it doesn't seem like it's useful to introduce a generic. Yeah, I mean, bad wording here, but like, yeah, it doesn't make sense to have a generic type in here that is potentially more useful, because it doesn't seem like it will be discoverable anyway in this sea of extensions types. All right, so then let's move on to the next one. I think this might be the JSON one. Yes, David, are you on? Oh, this was the one where we just said we want to make it plural, right? That I didn't approve yesterday. So I assume nobody has a concern with that one, right?
I marked it approved right before the meeting started.
Oh, perfect. Then cool. Then let's just skip this one. I think this is Carlos, right?
Yeah, I can speak on it.
Oh,
so it's
awesome.
Analyzer, pretty straightforward. Just if remove is used within the guard contains key, then we just remove the contains key guard because it's redundant. If you scroll down, we have some examples.
Oh, I see.
Severity info, and I think we don't want to do that if there is unrelated code within the condition.
Does dictionary remove return what was removed?
I don't think so. I think it's return boolean, right? The
yeah,
other
I think
one
that's what this overload is for, right?
Return.
Yeah. I think remove just is it's usually bool or void.
Fair enough.
I mean, we could, with the comments about not doing this, if there's any other code in the block, I mean, we could do a crawl, walk, run thing, but there are certainly cases where if contains key, and then the first thing in the block is remove, and then there's other stuff afterwards, and that could be converted to if remove, and then all the other stuff in the block. But we could add to it over time if we wanted to.
Yeah, my comment was gonna if we have the did I remove something and what was it in one call, which I feel like we do, then even if we don't have the fixer fix it, having the squiggle or squiggle it seems, I use fancy words, seems reasonable because it is a double dip, and
right.
Suggesting there's a better way for you to do this that has the same, that should be allowed to do the same logical flow, but if you have if contains key then print the entire dictionary state, then certainly you wouldn't be able to do that with a rewrite, so you'd have to suppress on that one. But I feel like that should be about the only thing you would do that would be wrong.
Yeah, without fixer to do just one sounds good.
Yeah, but the highlighted code could be changed to if remove key, comma out var old value, then other data of key equal old value.
Just fixer will be kind of difficult, I guess.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Well, I mean,
I wouldn't do the fixer for it, but.
My assumption is we have another proposal for another analyzer somewhere that would suggest changing this to if try get value, right?
Yeah, there is other analyzer, but for getting
Right. So
valuable
the ideal is this one would end up becoming if try get value, do something, and then remove.
Well, bizarrely, it looks like for this one, I think the correct answer would be if remove, with the one that does the out of the value it removed.
Oh, if we have that, do we have that?
Yeah, remove t key and out t value.
Yes.
Okay, sure. Yeah. What I was going to say was if we didn't have that, I just want to make sure we're not like double warning, like two different analyzers suggesting different approaches to solving the same thing, and one being better than the other and not being able to prioritize.
Right. That would be pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So then I guess we consider this one approved, and let me add the notes that I have here. All right, so then next one, I guess.
I think it's what Steven was talking about. It's pretty similar.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. So in that highlighted code from the previous one, it would be the case that both of these would trip because it was if contains key followed by an indexer followed by remove, and while try get value followed by remove would work for that particular path, a more optimal code would have been just to call remove because that was what the functional flow it was going for. I think that's a human assessment.
I mean, maybe this all comes down to we have one analyzer that analyzes the general guard pattern and decides which of the various warnings to issue.
That would.
I actually was thinking there might be one analyzer.
Yeah, I guess if it's the same code, it can be different diagnostic codes, but if it's the same class, then it can certainly know I'm about to produce the one for remove, so don't produce the one for guarded fetch.
Because they're all about guarded dictionary access, so just put them in one thing. And if you want, issue different diagnostic IDs and different fixers.
Yep.
Yeah, different IDs sounds reasonable to me. And same class sounds good for implementation. It may even be 3 different IDs, one for you have guarded remove, one for you have guarded remove and looks like you use the value, and one for you have guarded indexing. That would make the fixer easier because it only has to latch onto the code.
Right. Yep, makes sense. All right, let me just copy paste my
I'm particularly interested to see when this is implemented, what it catches in .NET runtime. For some of the other analyzers we've looked at, we've already done passes to, look for the patterns and fix them. But this one is complicated enough that we haven't really. So it'll be interesting if we have no violations or lots of violations or whatever.
Makes sense.
Especially for things like the, places where we've added new overloads. Like if dictionary has removed key out key value, I think that's a pretty recent addition. Probably a decent amount of code was written before that existed.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Another case, similar case. Oh, it's not exactly the same though, but if it's just in triad.
Okay, so this is contains key guarding add, not triad over add.
No, so just in triad over add.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Again, it seems like it's the same
Yeah.
class with a different diagnostic and different fixer.
Yep.
Presumably that still means this one is approved, and then we can just for
what it's worth, Steve, remove with the out t value we added in core 2.
Okay, so a few years, but not 20.
Right, and not framework.
Right.
Which means the analyzer is going to be potentially noisy in anything that we have to cross-compile for net standard 2.0. But that's our problem.
Yeah, I mean, in general, for these sort of small perf wins for the things we are having to cross-compile, we've generally just said, we're just going to suppress the warning rather than deal with it, because it's generally not on hot enough paths for us to go through the motions to split things up.
Yep.
We'll see.
Yes,
all right.
This one.
Sorry, go ahead.
There is the when I'll used for only one task, then suggest to use maybe wait. I'm not sure the wait the correct one, but
just remove the when all. So if it was a wait when all of t, just change it to a wait of t.
I see. So
this is detecting when the params overload is getting invoked with only one member. Right?
Yes.
Because the one calling the IN removal will be hard to identify.
Yeah, this one is interesting. Like, I've seen this actually show up a bunch in people's code, and I don't know why. I haven't yet figured out what drives people to write that, but I've seen it enough that I'm actually interested in having this.
Yeah, I mean, I can speculate that it's that they used to have win all with 2 things, and then they removed the second thing, and all they did is remove all their red squiggles and
Right, maybe.
didn't think about the line. I do. Is it in addition to an analyzer? Is it worth adding a win all that takes a single parameter and just returns it? Just as a guard for this?
I personally don't think. I don't think so. I mean, that you'd be optimizing something that doesn't need to exist at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it seems very weird to have an overload called when all that takes a single task. Like, I mean, at that point, the cognitive dissonance is strong, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, with the analyzer, it would be good enough, especially because this analyzer can run back to 4.0.
It can run back to when all was introduced, which I believe was 4.5.
Okay, but
all right, so then
is this have anything to do with task.waitAll? Because I see the call of the task.winAll is suggesting task.wait. Or do I need to refresh or something? Like those are different things, right? Which is like a replacement for waitAll?
That code is incorrect in multiple ways.
Okay.
First, that task.winAll. Okay. There could be a variety of things in this thing. If someone wrote task.winAll of t without the await, then they've written an expensive no-op. So maybe they were trying to wait for it, in which case the fixer should really be await this thing. But if you could have awaited it, the compiler's already going to warn you that you've gotten a waitable that's not being awaited. So we don't really need an analyzer for that. The thing that I thought this was about is someone using await task.winAll with a single argument, in which case the winAll is just unnecessary overhead and complication in the code, and it should just be await t. But you would never want to replace task.winAll of t with t.wait. That's just not something we should suggest.
right.
Now we could also have the analyzer look for task.waitAll of t and replace that with t.wait.
That is next analyzer.
Okay.
We are going to discuss.
Whether it's the same, certainly there could be different diagnostic IDs. I don't have a strong opinion, but that's fine.
again, there being different diagnostic IDs would be helpful to the fixer. So it doesn't have to rebuild the state.
Yeah. I also, I don't know, I mean, in general, we want to discourage folks from doing synchronous waiting in general. I mean, not to the point where we want to have an analyzer for it, but I care more about the win-all analyzer than I do about the wait-all analyzer.
Yeah.
And so being able to enable them, you know, separately or disable them separately would be nice. It's not called out here, so I don't think I need to say it, but I will anyway, just to be sure. Like, this is only about the all variants. We should not be doing this for the any variants because those have different semantics.
Really? Like, if you pass in a single argument, doesn't have that the same semantics?
Well, someone could be using it to avoid exception propagation, because when any doesn't actually like find the task that was completed and then wait on it. It just tells you which task was completed, and then it's up to you what you want to do with it. So you might await task.whenAny with a single task to avoid throwing an exception.
Wow, that's subtle.
Yeah, but it's my point being, like, there are potential reasons someone could write it. So I wouldn't want to suggest they change their code to something that would have different semantics.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I do feel that means that every invocation of when any now needs an essay of the person who wrote it explaining these are the behaviors that I'm intending.
Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty. Well, it's pretty rare to see a when any with one argument. Usually it's if await task dot when any T1, T2, T3 equals T1, then blah, right? So there, and that's why you don't want when any propagating the exception, because you're generally going to check what task completed and do something different based on what it was, or you're going to process it and then loop around again or whatever. So it's very rare to see when any with one argument, but because there is a potential valid use for it, I don't want to introduce potential bugs.
Well, yeah, probably if you're using it with one argument, you're actually wanting the side effect, like it being no throw.
Exactly. You either made a mistake or you very much not made a mistake.
Yeah, I think you might subscribe to much intentionality for how people use some APIs.
Awesome.
All right, so then I think we have one more, right? The cancellation token one?
Yep. If there is a check of cancellation token and throwing operation cancelled exception, we just want to suggest throw if cancellation requested method instead.
Yeah. Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we would want to, if they're throwing operation canceled exception or task canceled exception, either of those, we would change it to throw if cancellation requested.
I don't think we want to do that. So I've said this multiple times, but for the record, I hate that we added task. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
My connection dropped for a second. Yeah, I hate that we added task cancel exception. That was my bad. We should have never done that. But having done that, some people do care that a task canceled exception is being thrown. And so I'd be a little hesitant to automatically change task canceled exceptions to the base exception. Like we allow replacing, throwing a more derived exception, but we would balk if someone tried to throw a less derived exception.
Well, but doesn't throw if cancellation requested throw a task canceled exception?
No, it throws an operation canceled.
Ew. Well, thank you for correcting me because I was wrong.
You're welcome.
Sorry, you're saying throw if cancelled requested throws operation cancelled, not task cancelled?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So task canceled exception is a bad type. Like we shouldn't have added it. We added it because we thought, maybe in the case where it was a task that was getting canceled rather than something else, that you would want to know what the task object was. And so all task canceled exception is an operation canceled exception that has a task property. The problem is in 99% of usages, you really don't even know what the task is. It's not populated well. And all we have is an operation canceled exception of a
I think we lost him.
Yep.
That's just me.
No, I think that's what happened.
Okay.
We should definitely do this for operation canceled exceptions, though, right? Seems like a good idea.
So then, how we do this?
And I double checked the code. It is throwing operation canceled. So.
You double checked, Stephen? All right. So then.
Yeah, because he's sort of gone. So.
Okay. So then I think we're done with the ones we said we'll do today, which now means we can do more. I think there were a few more analyzers that.
There is a thing with task cancellation that it would be great if, Tobe was still able to speak to us. That I feel that there's an anti-pattern of people doing if cancellation requested return, and that sometimes you're doing it intentionally, but often you're doing it because you don't understand how task cancellation works. And so I wonder if we would also want an analyzer for that, but it may be that is different.
Sorry. Can you hear me again?
Yep.
Sorry, I was on my phone, and I think it's been like I must have been stuck on the border between the cell tower and my home network, and it kept switching back and forth. I hear what you're saying, Jeremy. There are sufficient number of cases, I think, where if cancellation is requested, return is warranted, that I would be hesitant to warn about it.
Okay.
I mean, it would be a trivial analyzer to write, I think. We could see what it flags in various code bases, but I suspect it would be a high enough false positive rate that we would, it would basically be off as like none by default.
Okay, and then, but just to confirm, you do still agree that we put it in guidelines of if it's canceled, you should let it go to the canceled state and not to the succeeded terminal state.
Definitely. It's just that some people use it as basically a simple, like a boxed Boolean that they can signal between threads to basically, and in those cases, it might be perfectly fine if we're not throwing.
Okay, so you agree that the guideline says you should be throwing, but if the code says it's not throwing, that maybe it was intentional and there's not enough. It's not like 99 to 1, so we shouldn't add the analyzer. Okay.
That's my current hypothesis, yes.
So how about we review the other two analyzers that we still have? I don't know whether anybody can talk to them, but it seems like
I can talk to this.
Perfect.
Yeah, just proposal for adding suggestions to instead of string compare result equals 0, we can suggest string equals state, and it might be not that performant, but it can be like code styling suggestion.
Yeah, I think that part of this is we were missing some of the overloads on equals that we had on compare, and so there were places that you needed to write compare equal 0 in the long ago.
I mean, I would say it's a bit unfortunate that numbers 3 to 4 are basically replacing the code with longer versions, but
I assume you mean 2 and 3, because 4 it gets shorter because you get rid of the equal 0.
Sorry, yeah, off by 1, yeah. The middle one,
Okay.
basically, yeah. I mean, it makes sense though. Like, I mean, it seems pretty obvious.
Will the analyzer be able to distinguish comparing to 0 versus doing like a greater than, less than comparison, like looking at -1 or whatever? Like, it can return, like, you can use it for greater than, less than, right? Like if you're trying to short string.
I think it's saying only if it's doing
only.
a literal equal or literal not equal to 0.
Yeah.
Perfect.
After constant folding.
Yep. So I assume that nobody has a problem with the analyzer.
I'm good with it.
All right, then.
I really thought we already did this one.
It does feel like we talked about it. Maybe that was only when we were doing the initial analyzers classification and prioritization. And we put it in that we'll talk about it later bucket.
Wasn't there one of these use those char overload instead of string overload that we actually did in .NET 5 that Prashant implemented? Am I misremembering? Maybe that was something else.
I mean, I have no memories, but I'm probably also the worst person. So when it comes to memory.
I think char overloads was new ones. Didn't exist before.
I didn't mean to derail us. If we don't have it, we should have it.
Yeah.
Yep. Seems reasonable. Are these the only ones you would do, though? Seems like there's a general thing where chars and strings should be, or where individual, like strings of one character should call this char once. Or is it just contained? Like things like index of come to mind here, right?
Well, like, I don't know that you would say that anytime that you have an overload, or two overloads, one takes string, one takes char, and you're passing a literal that's a single character, that you would prefer or suggest replacing the char one. Because, like, I don't know that, console.write is better for the char. It may, in fact, be worse for the char. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not saying we should have a rule like that. I'm just saying, like, there might be other overloads that should have the same behavior as contained. So we should still have an explicit list here, but, like, I don't think that it's just contained. Right?
That's fair.
Like, for example, index of is probably exactly the same as contains, I would guess, right? Or index of any, or,
So unfortunately, index of is one of the problematic ones because oddly, index of is culture aware.
Great.
Meaning the char version is worse than the string version, or?
Meaning the char version may not have the same behavior as the string version.
Okay.
Okay, then how about I just formulate the question here and then somebody else can decide or not decide, but all right, so today is a good day, so let's just walk the remainders then. I guess that's the one that we can't do because that's WinForms. We should. Can anybody talk to that one?
If memory serves, this is an API from .NET Framework that is about a behavior that doesn't exist in .NET Core. And there's no reason for it to exist. And so it's basically saying let's obsolete it because it's irrelevant in a no-all.
So if you set it to false, it's just we don't do anything with that information?
I think it defaults to false, and if you set it to true, it drops it.
Sorry, that's what I meant, yeah. Okay. I mean, it makes sense to me. I don't think that that's a bad idea. Jeremy's silent, which is suspicious.
I mean, if it has no purpose, then you shouldn't be calling it. It's fine with me.
This is kind of a general question. Sorry, I support the change, but why doesn't obsolete kind of default to editor browsable never behavior?
Yeah, so the reason we don't do that is because it gets complicated, because now the question is, if the obsolescence has a diagnostic and you suppress that, you probably don't want to hide the type from IntelliSense because you're suppressing it because for better or worse, your library uses the feature. I mean, for properties, it's probably not a big deal, or for enum members, but imagine it's types. So if you basically hide the entire type from IntelliSense, it might get extremely annoying to evolve your library that uses the obsolete feature. So I think, to me, I would never just blindly apply editor browsable to things you obsolete. I think it makes sense for particular overloads or properties or things that are extremely easy to use, but like I would not do it for types, for example, because it just interferes with your editing experience way too much.
Yeah, and sometimes there's just it's obsolete, but it's still really popular. Like whichever of the assembly load froms does the thing that we wish no one would do, but everyone wants it to do, or not load from, but assembly.load, like loading it with the partial name or whatever.
Yeah, so I guess the only question here is, should this get a diagnostic ID? But, I mean, this is one of those things, they're so easy and so simple, I have a hard time believing anybody wants to suppress that particular case here.
I'll defer to the framework obsolescence PM. So,
yeah,
I think you said no.
I think my gut feel seems over-engineered to add a diagnostic ID for this case. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can't think of a reason people would want it. I guess, Steve, you know what the purpose of this is. How likely is someone to have a net standard 2.0 cross-compile where they care in framework and they are tired of getting yelled at in the thing that used to be called core and now is hard to talk about in meetings?
I think it's pretty rare. I won't say it'll never happen, but it's probably pretty rare. Is it a breaking change to add a diagnostic ID after the fact?
Sort of. I mean, it's a source-breaking change, strictly speaking, but I think I'd be okay with that. I mean, if we ever change our mind and realize that too many people want to suppress this individually, then I think that would be good to do.
Yeah. It's no more of a breaking change than just obsoleting something with a diagnostic ID from the get-go, right? It's introducing a warning.
Correct.
Well, yeah. I guess yes. It's as breaking as putting obsolete on in the first place.
Yeah, that's another way to think about it. I think it's probably the more useful way. All right, so let's do that. Let's add the comment. I guess now I'm not very consistent with my own style here, but good enough. All right, so service controller.stop. Is Miriam still on the call?
Is this the Windows services thing, or is this something else?
I think it's... Oh, that's the Windows one. Yeah, never mind. I thought that was the extension stuff.
No.
I mean, honestly, I don't know enough.
Who marked it ready?
Anirudh?
Yeah, Anirudh.
Well, I mean, let's look at the proposal and see if we can. Okay. It sort of makes sense.
Does it? I mean, why would you write that code? Why would you not just call stop on the service?
Well, so this is the same as, I mean, it's the opposite direction, but, there's like directory dot remove recursively and directory dot remove, and one of them is I want this to be removed, and the other one is remove it if it's empty. And this is I want to stop this service, and the current behavior is if there's a service that is dependent on this service, it will have to also be stopped, so do it. And I think the passing false is, and I want no surprises. So like if you stopped I actually can't think of two services with a dependency, and I'm too lazy to type the service control manager commands. But you'd think it would be pretty weird if you stopped the Teams video chat service and it closed your remote desktop because they happen to say that the remote desktop service depends on Teams video sharing, and so it makes sense. I don't know why somebody wants it. I can sort of imagine why they would call it, but I'm surprised that somebody's asking for it now, because I think the heyday of this class was right around the time I started, so 16 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a fairly straightforward design here. I mean, assuming we can implement it straightforwardly, which I assume we do, because we probably have code right now in the stop method that basically does this loop. So
the only question I would really have is about the truthiness of the Boolean, because with the current proposed name and deriving functionality from the name, stop is stop true, and I wonder if that's
intuitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear what you say, but the problem is if you want to invert this, it becomes weird, right? You have now this mindfuck where it's like, do not stop dependent service is false, and then you have to think about what it means, or.
Indeed, and I'm fine with saying that anybody who's really using the service controller, either they're just copying and pasting code, or they actually kind of understand how Windows Services works, because in my experience, you can't be in between those two states. It is a vertical learning curve that that you would understand what it means. So yeah, it's fine. I mean, because the alternative would be that we name the method.
Yeah, I thought about that too.
Without stopping children or whatever, but
stop without dependence. Yeah.
Yeah, which is awkward. So yeah, it's probably fine.
All right then.
But I thought I saw something in here while you were scrolling about wanting stop with like timeouts and things of that nature. And if that's the case, we shouldn't add stop with a Boolean, because it's weird that you have stop bool, and then stop int, and stop cancellation token, and stop timeout. So I just want to make sure that we're reviewing the proposal that is actually being proposed, and not that like it changed in the middle of the thread.
No, I guess the idea here is that with this API, you can determine your own timeouts, right? Right, this is basically this thing here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that they're not paying it, and let's wait for status throws. I guess that's probably what it does.
Yeah, that's the problem where I don't know enough about the API, but I mean, it's also a fairly dated API, so it's probably fine.
Yeah, it's void, so it must throw when it hits the timeout.
All right, so key value pair.
Weren't there some concerns raised on here about size or something? Can you scroll down? Maybe not. I thought Jan had commented. Oh yeah, there.
Okay, can you explain why that is the case? I mean, the proposal is just to add an interface implementation on the struct, right? What am I missing with the proposals?
It doesn't have existing equals methods, right?
Right, but how does that impact the footprint of the dictionary instances?
Constructing a dictionary, like the generic instantiation of a dictionary implies a generic instantiation of key value pair.
Right.
I guess I don't know how.
Why? Because enumerating
apply to runtime memory.
He's particularly thinking about. I think he's particularly thinking about AOT, and if you instantiate a dictionary, if you have a generic instantiation of a dictionary, like enumerating it yields key value pairs, other APIs are key value pairs, so you end up with a generic instantiation of that key value pair.
Oh, because basically no means you have to have all the methods generated for this particular generic, yeah.
Right.
It's a generic type, so the method has to be recreated per combination of arguments.
This is the same, whenever we review a new API for dictionary, Jan has expresses a similar concern.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it is very unfortunate that we have a struct that doesn't have equality semantics that are efficient. But yeah. Because, I mean, you can do equality today, right? It's just not fast, right? And you can't write double equals because we don't have the operator. So it's a bit annoying.
And we could always add the double equals operator and stuff like that, but it means that you wouldn't be able to use this inside of an efficient mechanism.
Well,
but
adding
the
the double
argument,
equals
right?
operator makes the generic type instantiation larger, which is what Jan wants to avoid. We could add an extension equals method to make that equals better, but that wouldn't help equals because it's not going to find an extension method.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, any methods we add to key value pair is the problem here, right? It's not the interface implementation per se that's the problem. So, I mean, in fairness, I mean, it makes sense to me what the person is proposing here, but I will also say I never ran into this issue, so maybe it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm somewhat hesitant to not give people useful APIs just because we have a very abstract size constraint or concern. I don't know what that means. I mean, the problem I think that Jan is fighting for is it's not that this particular method is the problem. It's the total set of all these things that we're adding to all the BCR that is the problem. So, it's equally hard for him to give us a number, right? So it's a bit of a judgment call here, right?
Because, I mean, assuming it's the problem I think it is, it's with generics, or with a generic type, every time, if it's a single argument generic and you pass in a value type, then it creates a new copy of that type in the runtime.
Right.
With a multi thing, then now you have a combinatoric problem of if you have int, comma, reference type, that's different than reference type, comma, int. So that's two different copies now. And so this is, look at a .NET application after it's up and running. What is the average number of distinct generic created versions of dictionary or key value pair? Do you really want to add, 6,000 new methods to key value pair? And it's like, maybe not. I don't know, the 6,000's too high, too low, or in the right ballpark, but that's especially because this is a two-argument generic. It grows quickly, and so I assume that's his concern. That this is just too low level of a type to want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I buy the argument. It's understanding now what Jan was saying. I mean, unless there's strong evidence that this API is doing something amazing, which I don't see, it just seems like, it's a more consistency argument for how we usually do structs, but I have zero problem not approving this.
Yeah. I wonder if we have an analyzer that warns that you're doing equal equal on a struct that's not I-equatable, and
you can't do
tells you that
double
maybe
equals on a
or something
struct
else.
unless the struct defines the operator. It literally fails to compile. You can only do dot equals, and then we just have the generic runtime fallback that walks the fields.
Right. So I mean, we could have an analyzer of you're calling dot equals on a thing that's not I-equatable, but
I don't think that's a very useful analyzer, because if you're doing dot equals, like, you have to do dot equals. What's your alternative? Just suppress the analyzer or go back to the person who wrote the type and say, hey, implement dot equals overload?
Yeah, or write your own equals that uses all the public values off of it.
Yeah.
But okay, so.
So the issues with adding any API at all to this, I for some reason I was thinking that it was only the interface specifically, because I guess I thought the original issue was that a dictionary would now get more interfaces underneath its dispatch table, because it's like, oh, I'm I-enumerable of key value pair of blah blah blah, which means I'm also I-enumerable of like I-equatable of blah 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 blah. I guess that's not covariant in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly making the V-table for key value pair bigger, right? But I think it's more about the number of methods that the JIT has to tackle, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, let's just close it for now and then see what happens. All right, next one. Feature request enumerable for XML node list. Oh boy, does anybody know XML well enough here to have an opinion?
So it's already non-generic enumerable, and we want to add a generic one. Is that?
I believe that's the ask here. Yeah.
Haven't we done that in the past where we thought it wouldn't be breaking and it was breaking?
I don't think it was quite that, but there were certainly cases where we had non-generic collections and we tried to implement generic interfaces on them, and the problem was that the benefit could only be realized if we were to add strongly typed methods on the type rather than explicitly implementing it, and that wasn't possible due to the way the type is already shaped or something.
Yeah. So I can say this type looks like it'll be a losing battle, because it's get enumerator that's the non-generic get enumerator is abstract. So we can't put the generic enumerable first, which if my recollection of the for each pattern happened, it means it's still using the non-generic one.
Yeah, that's
it would
right.
only make link nicer.
Correct, yes. They say right now if you want to use link, you basically have to first say as enumerable of blah, 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 right? Or cast, I think you have to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the problem in general is like if you have a technology like, the old DOM, which is all built on the non-generic collection types, I think your phrase is really telling you. It's like it's a losing battle. You get maybe some minor benefit, but then it still feels like a bolt-on that is not really carrying through the entire design.
Right.
I mean, the real fix is don't use that particular technology. Like use X document and be happy.
Yeah, but yeah, since we can't do the normal thing we do with I-enumerable and I-enumerable of T, of make the T one be the default public one, the only benefit to this that I can see is link. Well, the system.link.enumerable extension methods.
Because you're saying any implementation of I-enumerable of T would have to be an explicit interface implementation, correct?
Yeah, you'd have to be casting it.
Yeah. Yeah.
For each is going to still pick it'll pick the public get enumerator. Which
Yeah, you're right.
has to be the abstract one because it already shipped. $20 years ago.
So I guess we just say this is a wart. Sorry.
Yeah.
You're right. The workaround's not too bad. The workaround's to do like .as or .cast at the end.
Yeah, or of type, or
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, technically we could make the XML node list enumerator be I enumerator of T. So you could sniff the get enumerator that came back to see that it was an I enumerator of T, but I don't think anyone cares. It's a non-public type.
Yeah. Why did the bot add the untriaged label after I closed the issue? That seems like a very weird reaction.
Is that .NET runtime? Oh, wait. How come it's the MSFT bot? That doesn't usually add untrashed.
I don't know.
Okay, I'll ask around. That's the first time I see it. Maybe
we're doing bot consolidation.
Yeah.
All right, enumerable partition. Any takers on this one?
Are you here, Eric?
If not, let's skip because I don't understand half the terminology in this API already. Satisfied, falsified. All right.
I think it's like just glancing at it. I think it wants to return where and where not as two separate lists.
Oh, so the ones that basically are where the predicate is true and the one where the predicate is false.
Yeah.
I see.
But satisfied and falsified seem weird, and I don't know if the value tuple seems like the right answer. Or
before we even get to talking about naming, is this really common enough to warrant?
Yeah. Also, I would argue you can trivially do this with group by, right? Like it's not like.
Yeah, this is or two lookup. Is then you end up with two of true and a false, right?
Yeah. It seems like. Yeah, I don't know. It seems very. I mean, that's something where I think Eric should probably talk to whether he thinks that's useful. But like, I have a hard time seeing that common, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's just keep that for next time maybe. And then does anybody know this one here? Who owns I/O these days? Who wants this ready? Oh, David. David, are you on the call by any chance? Doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, I mean, I can guess at the functionality, and I can guess it when it goes poorly. Like if you're on Windows, does support rebinding directories as parse points, or I guess junctions. But basically, if you had a circular directory structure, which I don't know if Windows allows, but Linux definitely does.
You can do it, yes.
Forever.
Yeah.
So having a hey, if you get 30 directories deep, I don't care anymore, seems reasonable. I assume max recursion depth. It says starts with 0. And it says starts with max value. Nice. I was going to say, I assume it just starts at max value.
Sorry, what would 0 mean? 0 would mean you wouldn't traverse at all?
Presumably.
I mean, it seems like it's an ask from the PowerShell folks, right? The way I read it here. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, yeah, what you said resonates with me, and it seems like the API proposal also kind of gels with what we already have. So
yeah, I mean, I agree the uint is logically the correct thing, and I think our normal framework rules say we would say int unless we can prove that we need that 30-second bit of
Yeah, I don't
positive
think so.
number.
Yeah, int is normally we just use int for everything. But what's our thoughts nowadays on using a nullable int to specify like no value, meaning no recursion limit, as opposed to a magic number like -1?
Yes.
I like nullable over magic numbers personally.
I mean, yeah, nullable is fine. The other answer where they have here, default is max value is also fine because you're not going to hit it. Like, it's not really a magic number. It's like, I'm going to count. This avoids if I don't need to count or the count is still okay. It's like, no, it's just if the count's still okay. If you overflow 31 bits, then yeah, sorry, we're going to stop recurring.
Yeah.
So either way, I mean, technically it would be a change because if you do have an infinite thing and you're not allocating at each step, you could run forever and now it would terminate. So if we care to make that keep running literally forever, we could make it nullable, but I would just make it int defaulting to int.max value.
Yeah, and as they called out in the comments, like eventually you're either going to run out of memory or get rejected by the file system anyway once you recurse deep enough. Because you like literally can't represent a directory structure 2 billion items deep in a single string, for instance. Like it's just forbidden. We can't represent that data.
Right. I don't know how the walkers work, and I feel like in the POSIX file APIs you can have I'm in this directory and I want this named child, and if that's the way that the enumerator is working, then with a infinite cycle you would be like, I'm at inode 115 and I want the child named Potato, and it's like, great, that's inode 115, and you're like, okay, what are its children? I want the one called Potato. It's like, whatever.
So I'm still somewhat lost for what the argument here is. I think David was
I guess
also
all recursion
asking,
means there's a stack somewhere, so you will eventually blow out your stack.
Right. I mean, I'm still kind of lost of like, does 0 mean no limit, or does 0 mean you don't traverse?
I would think 0 means I would think 0 means don't recurse.
Because I mean, basically, I think David was asking this here, right? If the type were in, then -1 could mean no limit. And then he said, I believe we have no need to have no limit value. It is already default behavior, which to me implies that he thinks that is the 0 value.
Yeah, but then other things in here are like, well, if you make int.max value the default, then literally no one can tell that was different than no limit.
Right.
And so I think that having a 0 means don't recur anymore, and starting it at max value is reasonable. Or we can make it nullable. I have a feeling that the nullable implementation will be fine. Turn it into max value so that I can simplify my logic later.
Yeah, so I just looked at what other things we have on enumeration options. So there's a buffer size property of type int, where 0 basically means no suggested buffer size. So I don't know, like, I mean, I'm not opposed to the nullable thing, but it does seem weird to me that on the same type, sometimes null means absent of value, sometimes 0 means absent of a value. So I would just say, like, within the type, we should pick a pattern and stick to it.
No one's suggesting that 0 is an absence of value for this one, though, right? Like, that would...
I mean, I have a hard time thinking of a I mean, does it even make sense? I mean, I don't quite remember how these APIs work, but I think like you control the recursion, no? So does it even make sense to have a value for don't recurse? Is that actually a thing?
I mean, yeah, we could say that 0 gets normalized to max value as well, just so that the default is the default. Because, I think that there's a recurse subdirectories Boolean that they're showing in the usage examples line. So you already have a way to say don't recur at all. So max recursion depth equal default being do the default thing sounds user-friendly.
Yeah, which type is using these options? Does anybody remember?
Based on the usage example, it looks like file system provider enumerable.
Oh, provider, I see. Yeah.
Wait, is this a new API?
Yeah, it's the no allocation thing that Jeremy built for I think MS Build. It's basically a faster way to.
I was looking at framework source, not core source. I'm like, the only enumeration options I see is in system management. But yeah.
Oh yeah, file system enumerable. That's the one. Yeah. I see. So you pass in the options, and then you basically logically just for each over the end result. So that means you would not control the actual recursive behavior, but you have basically a predicate where you can say should include and should recurse. So if you don't want to recurse at all, you would just set the predicate to false for everything, which I think is more logical than having a magic value for max recursion 0, right? So I think it's okay to say 0 means no limit.
Fair enough. Yeah, buffer size 0 isn't really a special buffer size. The end of the remark says if the number you suggest is smaller than the smallest thing that we think makes sense, we're going to ignore your request. So buffer size of 1 is also do whatever you feel like doing. It's basically just a hint. This one is actually a limit.
Yeah, the only thing I don't like about 0 being no limit is it could conceivably mean don't recurse at all, even if there's another way to specify that.
Yeah, it's kind of like how 0 to an API that takes a timeout doesn't mean infinite, it means timeout right away.
Yeah. I mean, I would prefer the behavior that 0 means don't recur, but
yeah.
Fair enough. I mean, if that's what most people think, then let's do that because that seems more intuitive then. So that means the default value is then in max?
Yep.
Yeah. And I only gave that timeout example because I know Steve's on the call and I'm trying to get into his good graces.
Well, once you recurse deep enough.
Yeah. And that joke will make sense to absolutely nobody watching this on YouTube.
I know.
All right, so then let's approve this. All right, so we have 3 ones left.
We are cruising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we going to be done with overflow now?
Yeah, it seems like it. Any takers for this one?
Who are you asking?
Like anybody on the call, because I'm certainly not the network expert here, so. If nobody has an opinion on this, we should probably table this and ask the networking folks once they're back.
Yep.
All right, then let's go to the next one here. This one, I think it's easy for us to have an opinion.
Yeah, so per the discussion, there was a question as to when you would actually ever have a read-only span of string. But assuming you actually had such a thing, like this API would be relatively straightforward to implement.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of is you had an existing array and you wanted a slice of it.
I mean, I was thinking you just have a very small number of values and you stack-alloc them, right?
Can't
Rather than going
stack alloc reference types.
Yeah, that would be nice, except we don't support that.
Oh, cool. So then, yeah, then no.
Steve, you do a lot of work with the language people. When are we getting params span?
It's hold on one second, I need to shut my door. It's definitely on the list. Params span, params enumerable, like they're all sort of in the same bucket, and maybe C#10, maybe.
Which is beyond 6?
No, that
beyond,
is 6.
Beyond that. Okay. Because I feel that if we had param span and whether or not it would do a sort of more optimal thing for a span of reference types, I think that if we had param span, we would look at things like string.join here, and we would just go through and go to town with. These are things that are params that we want to spanify, or things that would have had value as being params, but we were always afraid of the accidental overhead of somebody not realizing that when they do this in a for loop, it's creating a 13-element array every time. And so, yeah, maybe we would hold this until then.
But can we actually meaningfully do any optimizations? Because I think many of our params basically take, either object or strings, which are all reference types. And if you can't stack allocate them, what would the compiler do better than just allocating an array?
So if the other half of one of the slated tentatively for C#10 features goes in, which is the better ref scoping rules, which would include support for effectively value arrays and fixed size buffers of any type, not just the primitive types, then the compiler could generate behind the scenes a struct which contains the correct number of fields, and pass that as a span, as a correctly scoped span to, for example, this join method.
Yeah, but that's something that we were already experimenting with source generators. Steve Harder, I think, had some prototypes of that. But yeah, that would work, assuming the compiler could do it.
Yeah, I mean, just because the C# language doesn't let you stack alloc string 3 doesn't mean that the C# compiler can't write down fields that it knows will be aligned and then pass a pointer to them. It can do cheating things that the language can't, assuming that the runtime supports it. But
so what that makes me think is that if all of this potentially would be in the scope of param span, as was mentioned earlier, we probably shouldn't look at this API in isolation, and instead should look at it as what would it mean to param spanify much of the runtime or much of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I would agree with that unless somebody does think that there's a compelling reason to do string join of read-only span, in which case it doesn't hurt to do the one-offs, but if it's just like, oh, this could be better, then I think it's param span.
All right, so what I'm hearing is we should defer this.
Yeah, because they can. Yeah, so we do have because they're specifically asking for read-only span of string and not read-only span of object, and there's an existing string join that takes I enumerable of string. So instead of using slice, they could use link, skip and take. Or
but what if they're trying to pass an XML node?
Slice range. It says read-only span of string. It didn't say of object. So yeah, I think that I don't want to create a new array is already there. It's just a little bigger. But we did add that enumerable.range or whatever we called it, which gets them pretty well aligned to what they are asking for.
I mean, I'm not sure that. I don't know. The array would have to be very large in order for you to say that link performs better than just creating a new array. So, I don't know. Realistically, when you say string.join, how many values will you have? If you do this for a 5,000 element array, you're doing something really terrible anyway.
Right. Well, yeah. So they have using string join to concatenate a given slice of a larger string array. So let's assume that it's large enough that they care. They can use the enumerable one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think string.join, imagine it as a poor man's CSV formatter. I could see people doing that frequently, for instance.
Yep. But yeah, and you could always write your own enumerator that was the range enumerator over an array.
Yep. So then let's leave this open and see what comes.
Sure. If we leave it as ready for review, it's going to pop up continuously. So I don't know if we want to close it and say it's solvable with enumerable already, and then maybe link to where we just added enumerable.range, and but that we will reevaluate it as part of a bigger param span when that comes online.
Yeah, that also works for me.
Because I think we want to be clear that there's no action that we're going to take until param span.
Yeah.
So that sounds like closed to me.
So there is, I don't want to sidetrack too much, but they did list a scenario in here where they're trying to use the existing array-based overloads, and they're saying hey, it's kind of painful to keep index and count kind of consistent with each other, especially as I'm trying to chunk this on my own. And I wonder if that means that there might be an opportunity for kind of a helper API, which is given an array and given a read-only span, try to get the array segment that is the part of the array that corresponds to that span. That way, from the array segment, you could reconstruct the index and the count.
Steve, Tanner, how impossible is that?
Sorry,
Can you reiterate it?
So what they're trying to do here as a scenario is they have an array, a string array, and they're trying to call the array-based overloads of string.join. And in order to call those overloads, because they're chunking, they need to keep the index, the offset, and the count kind of self-consistent with each other to make sure that they don't go out of bounds when they're passing those parameters onto the string.join method. And they said if we could just call slice, that would make our life easy because we only need to keep track of one thing, and then we could pass the slice into string.join. And I was wondering if this is actually a scenario where we could have a kind of more fundamental helper method, which is given a T array and given a read-only span of T that corresponds to a slice within that array, return the array segment of T that is the slice. That way, from the array segment, you can reconstruct the index and the length for the span. Again, I don't know if I'm overthinking this. I'm just wondering if we had that lower level API, if the person could be unblocked right away.
I think we had discussed something like this previously, and we decided against it. I think we had discussed the APIs for trying to go from a span back to the original backing array, and we basically had said users have both of them, so they can use unsafe to do the tracking themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, well, because I know I had brought one of from a read-only span get the span, or from a read-only, or from a any span type get a memory type. I don't think when I brought a proposal it was go all the way back to array, but I do think it is even though from the span I don't think you could get the array, but if you give the array and the span, then the overlaps. Like, you could span the array, do overlaps, and now you know the relative indexes.
Yeah, it's basically a glorified call to overlaps. You can never go back from a span to the original object because we've lost that information. But if you had the original object, we could tell you where inside that object the span is.
Yeah, so we could make the helper, or, we could write in the issue here, hey, here's your 4-line helper.
Maybe I'll just respond with that after this meeting then and see what they think.
All right, so we close this for now, and then you will take more comments, I guess.
Yeah. Because I think the scenario is interesting, and I'm just trying to figure out how we can, if it's not intuitive, as to how to use the existing APIs in order to accomplish the scenario.
Okay, let me try to phrase it a little bit more forward-looking then. Oh no, grab the kitch from there. All right. Now I look less like a jerk. All right, so is Miriam still here?
Yes.
Do you know what this is?
Issue number 4698. I'm just going to quickly check. 4698. I think Santi, I'll ping Santi and see, because he was in the meeting a couple minutes ago. I'll see if he can drop back in. If there's one other issue on top of this, we can go with that, and then meanwhile I'll.
No, I think that's pretty much all we have. Like, I mean, it's also fine to say we don't know because we're now down to 4 issues. So I'm also fine with calling it a day, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Then let's do this. Let's just say we are done for today, and then I will just, schedule these ones and tag the right people, and then let's do it next week.
Thank you.
So are we canceling tomorrow?
I'm canceling not just tomorrow. I just cancel the whole series basically to be only just back to one Tuesday basically.
Okay. When you publish notes for today's meeting, make sure you start the seeker a few minutes before the meeting started, so it'll pick up where I marked approve on the ignore cycles.
Sounds good. We'll do that. All right. Then I would say bye everyone, and then see you next week.